On June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler initiated Operation Barbarossa, marking the largest land invasion in history, Germany's assault on the Soviet Union. This pivotal campaign would play a crucial role in determining the outcome of World War II. Initially, the Germans experienced remarkable success as their panzer divisions advanced swiftly and the Luftwaffe dominated the skies. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers were killed or captured in huge encirclement battles. Germany seemed to be on the brink of another major victory. But the Soviet Union did not crumble. Despite enduring significant losses, the Soviet forces maintained a resilient will to fight. This turn of events forced the Germans onto the defensive and resulted in Hitler's first land defeat in World War II. But how did it happen? Why did Operation Barbarossa come so close to success before falling at the final hurdle? Adolf Hitler initiated the planning for the invasion of the Soviet Union as early as July 1940, predating the Battle of Britain. This impending invasion was perceived as the crucial battleground where the ideology of National Socialism would either triumph or face defeat, and establishing a Germanic Aryan empire in Eastern Europe that would grant the resources needed for self-sufficiency. After swiftly defeating France and the Low Countries within 6 weeks, Germany exuded confidence in capturing territory from the Soviet Union. Hitler held the belief that the communist society was inherently fragile, and he was convinced that it would not require significant effort to overcome it. All we've got to do is kick the door in, and the whole edifice will come crumbling down. The Germans not only aimed for a quick victory, but also needed a swift triumph due to insufficient human and material resources for engaging in a prolonged war. Germany assembled an unprecedented force of over 3 million men, constituting the largest invasion force in the history of warfare up to that point. 3 army groups were deployed to pursue distinct objectives. Army Group North targeted Leningrad, Army Group Center aimed for Moscow, and Army Group South advanced towards Kiev. The whole strategy is a resumption of the blitzkrieg idea that's been so successful in France. When the operation commenced on June 22, 1941, those tactics proved highly effective. The advance surpassed all expectations, with German tanks swiftly penetrating Soviet defenses, leading to the capture of hundreds of thousands of troops. The Germans initiated the campaign by effectively neutralizing the Soviet Air Force on the ground, catching them off guard. This destruction of the Soviet Air Force allowed the German army to maneuver freely across the battlefield, making deep thrusts into the Russian interior and encircling the frontier armies. The Soviet military was caught entirely by surprise, lacking the time to fortify their new border in Poland. The German army advanced so rapidly into Soviet territory that the Russian troops, being quite slow, didn't have time to retreat, creating a problem for the German forces. Hitler made the decision to temporarily halt the offensive towards Moscow for a few days to avoid being surprised by the Soviet troops left behind. From this moment on, after capturing over 3 million Soviet soldiers, the Germans believed that the advance towards Moscow would be more of a military parade. The Germans had grossly underestimated the size of the Soviet army. By mid-September, the Soviet field armies were ultimately defeated, and the march towards Moscow could commence. This intermission allowed for a retrospective look and the cleanup of the rear areas, providing an opportunity for everyone to catch up. This pause also offered the Soviets a chance to redefine their front line, bring additional units forward, and fortify positions before Moscow. Consequently, a completely new defense line awaited the Germans when they resumed the offensive. The newly troops were undersupplied and undertrained, some lacking uniforms, with some soldiers wearing civilian clothes and having to share rifles due to shortages. Simultaneously, supplies from Britain began to reach the Soviet Union, providing sufficient equipment for the Soviets to maintain their presence in the field. On top of that, the Soviets had managed to relocate their factories from the advancing Germans to the Ural Mountains. This meant that war production was actually increasing, and they were able to deploy more tanks, such as the new T-34, to the front line. But worst of all, the weather began to deteriorate towards October. As they encountered the unexpected new defensive line, contended with adverse Soviet weather, and faced the dwindling strength of German formations, the situation became more challenging. When they reached a mere 20 kilometers from Moscow, the weather had fully transformed into a harsh Soviet winter by the end of November. By this point, more German troops were in hospitals due to frostbite than injuries from combat. The offensive came to an end. Despite Barbarossa stalling, Germany appeared to be in a favorable position on the larger scale. Army Group North anticipated the imminent fall of besieged Leningrad. Army Group Center was at the gates of Moscow, and Army Group South had successfully secured the Ukraine and Kiev. However, little did they know, the Soviets had an ace up their sleeve. They had successfully relocated the majority of the Russian divisions that were positioned on the eastern side of the Soviet Union, facing Mongolia and the Japanese. The Soviets gambled on the fact that Japan did not planning to launch an attack. These were not inexperienced, untrained troops. Rather, they were well-trained Soviet field divisions. Many of these troops were accustomed to winter warfare due to their origins in Siberia. In contrast to the fatigued Germans they were up against, these Soviet troops were equipped with winter camouflage and weapons designed to withstand the extreme cold. On December 6th, the Soviets initiated a significant counterattack, launching a large-scale counteroffensive in front of the gates of Moscow. This caught the Germans entirely off guard, compelling them to retreat, and marked the end of Operation Barbarossa. The Germans needed a swift victory, but the Soviets managed to persist in the fight and transform the blitzkrieg Barbarossa into a war of production. Now the Germans found themselves compelled into a war of attrition, a prolonged, grinding, and slow conflict within the Soviet interior, especially during winter. The situation appeared bleak for the Germans, lacking the manpower and resources needed to confront the Soviet armies on a one-to-one basis. A new German offensive commenced in 1942. While the German generals advocated for resuming the push towards Moscow, Hitler insisted that Germany needed the oil fields in Azerbaijan to sustain their armies. Under Hitler's direct orders, the target was the Caucasus in the south and the city of Stalingrad. However, this is a story for another video. So, was Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's first defeat, due to a tactical mistake, or was it because the weather began to deteriorate? Share your thoughts, like, and subscribe. See you in the next video.